Hey guys, what's up? Thanks for tuning in to another video. Today we are going to be talking about where to find bedding river smallmouth this time of year and how to catch them. And I think it goes without saying that finding bedding fish and catching them is a controversial topic. So if you're going to be triggered by this information, I suggest you just go ahead and tune out now. I understand that you might have a different viewpoint and I acknowledge that. However, you are not going to convince me in the comments that this is somehow immoral or unethical. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and get into my 4 requirements that I look for when I am looking for bedding river smallmouth. The first is going to be relatively slow or slack water. This can be created by the river channel and the changes in flow or cover in the river itself. The second thing I'm looking for is harder substrate. This is going to be relative depending on the river you're fishing, but smallies always tend to prefer a harder bottom when they spawn. My third requirement is relative protection from higher flows. That means certain areas of the river are going to be a little more protected than others. In the case of high water, fish are going to gravitate towards these areas in order to spawn so that their beds don't get wiped out in a high water event. And then lastly, smallies really like to get near to cover, both overhead and submerged when they are spawning, just for protection from predators and all that sort of stuff. So let's go ahead and look for these things in this first area that I'm going to be fishing. If we look on the left, we can see that we have a slow flow area, then we have the main channel current, but we also have an overhanging branch or brush, and that is going to be something key in this spot. And with the downstream vantage point, we can see the area that's going to protect that water along the bank. That's really where the shallow water starts. So even in high water, that's not going to be moving very fast. And if we pay attention, we can see that the water is pretty still along the bank there. And then what you can't see underneath the water is that there is a pebble substrate. So before I leave you with the rest of this catch, I just want you to make note of how that overhanging branch is essentially pointing right down to the bed. And then also out in the main river channel, we do have deeper water, and anytime you have that nearby, that is obviously a bonus. So with this example, not only are all 4 of my requirements met, but we do have a bonus characteristic in this part of the river that definitely adds to the value of this spot for fish who may be spawning nearby.
Let's go, guys. Not as big as I thought it was.
On this specific day of fishing, this was a new stretch of river, so I really had no idea where the fish were going to be bedding. So in between spots, I had to be casting to likely areas. And sometimes these can be really sneaky areas, like very small slack pockets tucked way close to the bank. And this is where it comes in handy to use the bank for clues. Anytime we might see a little rock outcrop or a little piece of wood down in the water, that's going to be an area to look for bedding fish in, because it simply has those requirements that we laid out at the beginning of this video. And I do want to point out that when fishing new areas like this, we're not always going to be able to see the fish on beds, and we're really not going to even know if they are on beds. So it is helpful to look for those likely areas where you think they might be pulling up to spawn, because the chances are we're going to be able to catch some pre-spawn fish there too if they haven't already moved up.
That's a fat one. 3-something pounds, fat. Let's go. Good start.
Even though many of you probably already know this, I think it's worth mentioning, and that is the fact that all fish don't spawn at the same time. So even though we have the first wave of spawners, let's say, on beds, there are going to be pre-spawners still out and about. So as we are floating down between potential spawning areas, casting the likely locations, we should also keep in mind that some pre-spawn fish are going to be hanging around the normal pre-spawn locations. And the spots that I look for pre-spawn fish in the most are going to be around cut bank and deep slack water near current seams, those feeding areas that fish are going to be able to get out of the current if they need to, but jump out into it if they want to eat, and vice versa, and then be able to move up into a spawning spot once they're ready. So even though it pains me that this topwater strike is just out of view, it's worth including because it teaches us that moving baits are still in play once fish have moved up to spawn, because there are still going to be pre-spawn fish out roaming and ready to eat.
All right, guys, 19.5-inch tank on top water on the plopper. They are at all stages of the spawn, so I'm not really sure what he was doing, but he's hitting moving baits, not a bloody tail, super fat fish. I think still pre-spawn. Definitely a good looking one. You're ready.
So as we float down into this next location, I want you to ask yourself, do I see slack water? Is it protected? Is there any sort of cover that might allow a smallmouth to make a bed under or nearby? And is the substrate right? Now, 3 of those things we can clearly see. The 4th we'll take a look at a little bit later, but if we have at least 3 of these things, this is an area we should definitely be fishing, even if we don't see a bed, even if we don't see a fish.
I see you.
I do want to point out really quickly here that I did see this fish, but it quickly tucked underneath that log. And when we're casting to a bed that we can see, don't expect the fish to come out and drill the bait like a reaction strike. It takes a little bit of work sometimes, and it also takes a little bit of patience.
Oh no.
Since I was able to find 1 fish here, the chances are there's going to be another one, especially if all of my requirements for bedding areas have been met. So I'm going to go ahead and keep casting blindly and hoping that I pick up another fish in this likely area.
Another one. So guys, just upstream there, it was a mostly sand substrate, and then as soon as the river kind of opened up below that turn, right down in here, it started to get rock substrate. And here we're looking at the very first eddy. And with that eddy having the right kind of substrate, there were 2 fish in it of pretty good quality, 18.5 and then a 19.
Now let's take a closer look at where this fish was bedding, and we can see that we have slow water, we can see that we have submerged and overhanging cover, we can see that we have the right substrate, and it's also in a protected area. And now that we've seen a pair of examples that exemplify the correct substrate, let's go ahead and look at the stuff that the smallmouth are not going to be spawning in. So you may have noticed that up to this point, I haven't talked a lot about the bait I've been using, and that is deliberate because I really don't think the bait is that important. The biggest thing for me when it comes to bed fishing is not spooking the fish. So I want to use a bait that isn't too big or isn't going to be too heavy and splash down into the water and spook the fish off the bed immediately. But for those of you who just have to know, I have been using a 1/8 ounce EWG jig head hook made by Shields, and I almost always pair that with a big TRD that is either in the Deal color or Gobi Bryant. Now that we've covered baits, let's go ahead and get back into the fishing. And if you've made it this far in the video, thank you. And it also seems that you're interested in catching more fish, which is something that can be a little bit hard to do even at this time of the year because the options can be so numerous, so plentiful that it's a little overwhelming at times, especially on new rivers. But I do think if we're looking for specific things, we can catch fish whether we know they're on beds, whether we can see them, whether they're pre-spawn, spawn, or post-spawn. As long as we have specific targets at this time of year, we're eventually going to run into some quality fish.
That's another good one, guys. Wow. It's a thick river smallie. Took that one down in there pretty deep, wouldn't you say?
So as you guys may have noticed, I had no idea that this fish was there. I had no idea there was a bed there, but let's go ahead and take a closer look at it so that we can see the substrate and we can see the kind of cover that it was located around. Clearly there was plenty going on. There was enough for the smallmouth to feel more than protected in this spot. And ultimately these are going to be the areas that I'm casting to anyway when I find out that fish are hanging out in slack water. So it really doesn't even matter if I know that they're on beds or not. I'm going to continue to throw to these high percentage areas regardless. So that is going to do it for today's video. I hope this has been helpful. Don't just sit at home this spring. Don't just dream of catching fish. Don't give in to the haters complaining about bed fishing. Get out there, do what you want to do, catch some fish, enjoy the outdoors. Don't worry about anyone else. You do you. So I'll see you guys next time. Maybe like and subscribe if you feel like it.